Okay, just taking care of a few housekeeping, answering some questions that have been sent to me in the Q&A. It's 4:59, so we will start promptly at 5 p.m. my time. So we'll start in just one moment, and I'm just making sure there's some of you that have put some questions for me in the Q&A. And oh, thank you for that. I'm going to miss you guys, and I'll talk to you about upcoming webinars after this session. So thank you for that, Nadia. All right, someone just said hello from Kuwait. So across the GCC region and also outside of the GCC region, I'm so happy to have so many of you joining me today. As I said at the beginning, when there were only a few of us on, this session is probably bittersweet for me. It is the last session of the Embracing Change series, and some of you joined me throughout. This may be your first time joining, but I truly enjoyed just working with you. It's been so interactive, so thank you for that. It's so hard when you're doing webinars via an online platform, so just thank you for your interaction, and I'm looking forward just to more interaction today. And so it is 5 p.m. I want to go ahead and start on time. I'm Davita, and I'm just so excited to be here. And I just want to first go over just a few housekeeping, just for those of you who are new to the Embracing Change series. Just all participants are on mute for the webinar platform, as well as all cameras are off. But please feel free to engage with me, engage with other participants using the chat features, using the Q&A features as well. I will try to get to your questions as soon as possible, but as always, I will stay on. I think some of you stayed on with me last week for 30 minutes after the session, and it was great. We had some just great dialogue back and forth, and that's really what I'm looking for in these sessions, is that this is going to be a true professional learning community where we share ideas with each other. And our session will be 60 minutes, and as always, we'll put the webinar session, the recording, on our website, and I'll give you that information at the end of the session. So again, thank you for joining. This is episode 4 of Embracing Change. And today we're going to be talking about inclusive practices for blended classrooms. And I'm really excited about this session. I've enjoyed all of them, but this one is a little dear to my heart. So if you're just joining me today, if this is your first, I just kind of want to go over the roadmap. And for those of you who've been at all sessions or have been at some of them, just want to kind of go over our roadmap. And we called this that we were taking a virtual road trip together, and I've loved it. So for the first session, we reviewed the 4 C's framework and really looked at those soft skills and those learning skills that are important for students so that they have skills to prepare them for college readiness and career readiness, and to be prepared for a global society and beyond. So it was just great to have that discussion. And many of our resources through National Geographic Learning, we just really embedded in the 4 C's. We truly believe in bringing the world to the classroom, to all classrooms, and the classrooms to life. And so you see that if you're already using our resources and our materials, you see exactly that 4 C's coming to life. Then the next week, we moved into building independent learners through a gradual release of responsibility. So we took flight on our virtual road trip, and we took flight and we talked about 2 frameworks, which were understanding by design, helping you to plan your lessons strategically, looking at assessments first, and then helping students to become independent learners through the gradual release of framework. And then last week, we set sail and we discussed balancing literacy for English language learners, all embedded in research-based practices, looking at shared, guided and independent reading, writing as well. So we really looked at what it truly means to have a balanced literacy classroom. And then this week, we are actually orbiting. We're setting off, we're rocketing. This is our closing for the series, and we're looking at inclusive practices for blended classroom models. And the reason why I say that this session is true to my heart, I've been with National Geographic Learning since the start of this year, but I'm also, foremost, I'm an educator. So I've been a teacher. When I first started teaching over 25 years ago, I was a special education teacher. That's how I entered the education field as a special education teacher. So I truly believe in inclusive practices. And most of my work and my research that I've done over the years, and as a leader in school districts in the United States, this is where I led districts looking at inclusive practices, making sure that all students, regardless if they were students with disabilities, or students as English as second language learners, or just students that are struggling, making sure that they're included, making sure that they feel included and that they have access. That's one of the words that you'll hear me say a lot today, that they have access to the curriculum and the content. So I'm going to love talking about this, but I'm going to talk about it in the realm of online, these blended or hybrid classrooms that we're currently involved in, and how can we still make sure that our classrooms are inclusive. Okay, and so I see some chats. Some people are raising their hands, and just to let you know that that feature is not available, but please just type in the chat and I'll try to stop and answer questions from the chat as we go on, and I'll have time for us to interact. All right, great. So let's just do a quick poll. Some of you are new, it may be your first time, or some of you are joining again, and I just want to try to do some interactive and fun things for today. We're going to take a quick poll so I can just know who's here with me, who has knowledge of this subject, those experts maybe in the field of special education or in the field of working with diverse learners. Just kind of want to know who we are, and we're going to do some fun activities with this. So I am going to launch our first poll, and if everyone can take about 1 to 2 minutes completing the first activity. Okay. Wonderful. I see some people started. That's great. I'd love to see the span of educators that I have here with me today. Some of you are new teachers, 1 to 2 years, and then some of you come to such a wealth of experience. So please join in the discussions. Put your ideas and your thoughts. That's truly what a professional learning community is, that we can bounce ideas off of each other. And that's the way I would like to have this platform. And it's great to see teachers from different disciplines. There are KG, elementary teachers. And I'm glad I have some people joining me in the Cinco department. So that's wonderful as well, because that's going to be kind of what we're going to talk about. So those Cinco teachers or leaders, please, the Cinco leads, and then those special education teachers or learning support assistants, please chime in and just share some of your ideas as we're going through this presentation. And thank you for the leaders that are joining us today as well. Okay, so as everyone is answering the poll, I'm enjoying seeing just this question. I put this: rate your experience levels as it pertains to working with students of determination in some areas in the region, called students of determination or students with disabilities. And so I see just there's a difference here. We have some with limited experience, some with some basic knowledge, some solid background. And we have some experts. Good to see. Okay, and I'm in your knowledge level regarding inclusive practices. And this one I'm going to discuss in a moment: how often do you monitor students' well-being? And I love, so far we're up to 61%. And you know, this one is what I'm going to talk about as we start this discussion: monitoring students' well-being, also monitoring our own well-being. You know, last year I was in a school building when we first went online, and so I know I was constantly checking in on my teachers to make sure they were okay with that paradigm shift from moving from a traditional classroom setting to an online setting. And so we were always a part of our school culture to make sure we were monitoring our teachers, but also monitoring students' well-being. And it's so important when we talk about inclusive practices. Are we monitoring our students? Are we checking in on them? Do we know how they're doing? because that really goes how they're learning as well. Okay, their well-being plays into that. So that's good to see. Okay, and then how many sessions of the Embracing Change series have you attended this month? So some of you have said 4. Thank you for being a part of this virtual journey with me. I love it. That's okay if you're just joining. Welcome for the first time. It's great to see. So the first person who has been here 4 times, if you can type, the first person to type your name in the chat box, you will receive a prize from me, which is this really cool plastic adjustable NGL, National Geographic Learning, coffee mug. So the first person to type their name will receive a cool, oh, thank you. I see so many. I'm gonna have to give it to the first 3. I told someone this was gonna be hard for me to decide because thank you guys for joining. So we're going to give out, for those of you who've been here, at the end of the session, I'll tell you how you'll be able to get in touch with me. But we just have some cool giveaways for those of you who have been a part of this journey since the beginning, some cool mugs and some water bottles that we would like to give to participants. So thank you for joining. And if you haven't been 4 sessions, there are going to be some other ways that you can earn a prize today as well. Again, let's make sure we're looking at our well-being, checking in and making sure we're all feeling good. Okay, so about 30 seconds. It seems like 86% of you have completed the poll. I will stop it in 30 seconds. Okay, thank you everyone. So many of you, 4 sessions. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so you'll receive a cheat from us within the next week. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll just for time. And I love just the range of knowledge that we have joining us today. Different disciplines are joining, as well as those of you who have some background knowledge regarding the topic and what it truly means to be inclusive in your practices, or even just in your school culture. You know, is your school culture, are you truly an inclusive school? Okay, so here's our launch plan, because again, we're setting orbit today. And our launch plan, we're gonna look at 2 main goals: to develop an understanding of inclusive classroom practices for diverse learnings. What does that truly mean? What does that look like in practice? And then to identify some online strategies to engage diverse learners in an inclusive classroom setting. The reason why I say diverse learners, I am going to spend some time talking about special education students or students with disabilities, but I'm also going to show that a lot of the strategies or a lot of the methodology that I'm talking about today can really go to a diverse group of learners, kind of those effective strategies for all. So some of the things you'll hear, just know that these are strategies you can use for all your students. Okay, not just special education, but I want to make sure that we're including and that we have inclusive practices to make sure that all students are learning, even during this online platform. Okay, great. Okay, so as you're thinking, I just want you to kind of just think about your practice, think about your classroom, or maybe thinking about your school building. And just start thinking of these questions, and you can type some of your answers in the chat. But how do you forge relationships with or between students in this online setting? So think about this online setting, or if you're hybrid, some students are in the building, some students may be at home. And how do you continue to forge relationships? And then also, how do you identify concerns? So how are you continuing to identify concerns for students? And so without the lack of social cues, so I'm a very social, I look at social cues, I look at students, I use my social cues as part of being a special educator. But so how do you continue to do that and establish a sense of community while you're online? And how do you engage participants? And notice I put all participants. So how do you engage all participants during an online setting? And then most importantly, how do you individualize instruction? So I'm interested to see what do some of you say, because all of these are characteristics that we have to look at when we're talking about an inclusive setting. Okay, so what do? How do you forge those relationships? Or how do you identify concerns in an online setting? Okay. Great. I see some people are saying breakout rooms. Okay. Great. Those are great to use to individualize instruction. Surveys. Great to build relationships and to understand and identify concerns. I love these. Okay. Reflection logs. Okay, Farah, I really love that one, reflection logs. I'm actually going to put that one down because that's great, having students to reflect on their own learning. Okay, easel by TPT. Great. Okay, someone just said my slides aren't moving. Let me just stop my share, my screen share, and see what's going on here. Okay, someone just said I'm still on poll activity, so let me just stop for 1 second. Make sure that I have ended the poll. Thank you for that. Okay, there we go. I think I have now fixed the problem. Guys, let's go here. Can everyone now see my slides? Yes, okay, perfect, thank you. All right, great. Okay, so thank you for that. So I'm loving to see all of the ideas, and I hope that you were able to, remember we're a professional learning community, and I hope you may see something, I haven't tried that, like the reflection log. Great way to forge those relationships and also to establish a sense of community when you can't always determine those social cues as well. So I really, really love those. Okay. Let's look at this quote, and this is probably one of my favorite quotes, especially I told you my background is in special education. Let's read this quote together. So to maximize student achievement in an inclusive, academically diverse classroom, the classroom itself must function as a community of learners that is designed to promote the activity engagement of every student in experiencing the joy of learning. I love this quote. Let's unpack it. Let's just really take a minute, think about what this quote really says, and think about your own practice as a teacher. So to maximize student achievement in inclusive, academically diverse classroom, the classroom itself must function as a community of learners that is designed to promote the active engagement of every student in experiencing the joy of learning. What stands out as an educator when you hear that? Okay. What stands out? What words stand out? I'll tell you, for me, one of the words that stands out, maximize student achievement. Maximize, everything that we should do should be outcome based, right? Outcome based. So how do we maximize student achievement? Someone said active engagement stands out for them. Great. I love this. Creating curiosity will lead students to feel interested in the content. Exactly. Joy of learning. Thank you for that one. Joy of learning. Often students that struggle, whether it's academically, socially, whatever deficits they may have, this is what's missing for them, the joy of learning. So how do we make sure in our inclusive classrooms that we continue with this joy of learning? So thank you for that. Positive reinforcement, and I'm going to talk a lot about that today. Provoking critical thinking, and we've had some conversations about that throughout this series. Safe learning environment. Okay, you guys are really touching into these inclusive practices. I love it. And being supportive. So all of these, if you kind of unpack this, this is how our classroom should look. Inclusive means that we have a diverse classroom. We are a community of learners. So that's why I asked in the poll, how often are we checking on students' well-being? Not just our special education students, but all students, or those students that we know are struggling, or those students that are shy and may not interact in our synchronous learning interactions. How are we checking on them? And then are we promoting active learning to increase the student's experience? Okay, so thank you for your choices. So this is what a truly inclusive practice is. It's kind of the definition, and I've broken it down into some different categories. So it's a teaching approach that recognizes the difference between students. Teachers recognize clear differences between the students. You understand that. If you consider yourself an inclusive teacher, an inclusive school, you understand that all students come to you with differences, different learning styles, different abilities, different ways that they learn, so that you understand that. And then you ensure that all students can access. So this is a word I'm going to talk about today, access the educational content. And often when teachers say, sure, we're inclusive, my classroom is inclusive. Well, sometimes teachers mean, well, that means that I give students lower work, or I'm not exposing them to the content. But this means access to the educational content at the grade level. How do you make sure that they have access to this content? How do you make sure that you remove those barriers so that they can access the content and they can participate? And so I would question that you would be able to address their needs then. So if you're recognizing differences, you're ensuring that students have access to the content, then you have to address their needs, okay? Their different abilities, their modalities of the way they learn, their backgrounds even, that you've addressed those. So you recognize differences, make sure they have access to the curriculum, you're addressing needs, whether that's through an IEP, those goals. Some schools I've worked in, even for our English as second language learners, we have professional learning plans, that you have a systematic way that you're addressing students' needs. And then it moves into your teaching practices, so your teaching and learning strategies, they contribute to that overall inclusive setting, that you're using strategies, accommodations, you're making sure that students are able to access the educational. So I love this kind of grid that's here, because this is how your classroom should look, that you're recognizing, you're making sure students have access, that you address those needs, and then your teaching and learning strategies all go to make sure, again, going back to the gray box, that students can access grade level, okay? Grade level, because we often assume when we're working with diverse learners that we shouldn't teach grade level to everyone, that we stay down here. What often happens, especially our students with disabilities, and even sometimes our students and English language learners, if we're always pulling their work down below grade level learn, then they're never showing progress. They just kind of stay stagnant, okay? So we have to figure out ways to remove the barriers so that they can access the content. And I love this puzzle. So I put this together as a puzzle because if we're really having an inclusive environment, we should look at it a little different. Not always go to students' weaknesses, okay? Let me go back here, that addressing the needs. Addressing needs doesn't just mean looking at their weaknesses, it's addressing their needs and coming from a strengths base. All students have strengths, all students do. So if we're in an inclusive setting, how are we making sure we're starting at what the student can do? What are their strengths? Knowing their learning styles, knowing their strengths, okay? And then regardless of those barriers or those limited factors, that we make sure that we're building a sense of community, we have active participation and engagement. This is true in inclusion, how this puzzle comes together, how we make sure this screen that I showed before, access to curriculum, using teaching and learning, addressing students' needs, recognizing, these are some ways to put that all together in an inclusive setting. And remember, regardless of those limiting factors, often we stay there. Sometimes when I read IEPs, this is where we stay, those limited factors of the student's experience. We forget to start with those strengths, okay? So we forget to start there. So what does that mean when we talk about online learning? And I'm loving some of these different strategies and the things that I see in the chat. What does this mean when we talk about online learning? So one of the things that I want all teachers to think about, we've had this huge paradigm shift. And I've been in education for 25 years. It was a paradigm shift for me when I was in the building last year. But remembering, if you truly want to be inclusive, that we have to think differently. And we should move from content driven, just thinking about the content. What do I need to teach? What are those standards I need to teach? And that's important. Don't get me wrong. We still have to do that. But our focus now that we're online, and especially for an inclusive classroom, whether it's online or in the class, it also needs to be learner driven. Okay, so let's go back to the slide. And I'm going to kind of go back and forth today because it's so important that we look at, remember this pieces of the puzzle, strength-based, addressing student needs, okay? So in order to be able to do all of those things, we have to make a shift, and it should be learner-driven, okay? Looking at students' strengths, knowing their needs. So then your shift has to change in an online setting, especially if we're going to make sure that we're meeting the needs of diverse learners. Your shift changes. You become more of a mentor, a coordinator, a facilitator. You know, last week we talked about, and the week before, gradual release of responsibility. So, you know, doing that heavy lifting in the beginning, the modeling, the I do as the teacher, but slowly move so that it's learner driven, that students can do things independently, but you're making sure that you're meeting their needs and removing those barriers so that they can do. That's what I mean by learner driven, that you know their learning styles. You're providing some choice within your assignments in the online platform. And I put here because when I talk inclusive, sometimes we forget this last statement. Fair does not equal same. Fair does not equal same. Our learning and our teaching should be fair, and that we're making sure that all students have access to the curriculum. That's the fair, but it's not going to look the same because it's learner driven. It won't be the same for every student. How Davida learns may be different than how Nadia learns. So I have to make sure that I'm giving Davida what she needs, that I'm scaffolding, particularly for Davida, or those accommodations for Davida, because Nadia learns different. So you're having to remember this, that fair doesn't always equal the same. Fair is making sure students have access and that students are learning, but they are may learn differently, and how your instruction looks may be different for an inclusive classroom setting. So let's just talk about what I believe are kind of some top things that one should see in an inclusive classroom in an online environment. So we have to make sure that we're explaining the big picture to students, that they know. You know, I talked 2 weeks ago about that backwards design approach, understanding by design. And so at the very beginning, you let students know what's expected to them, of them, the big picture. Okay, you're telling them the performance task at the beginning. You're explaining to them what's expected, how they meet those learning objectives. You're letting them know what the big picture is. And that's so important online because students tend to miss that. They're not quite sure what's expected or how do they show what they've learned, okay? Ooh, thank you for the equity better than equality, because I have a slide that's really gonna focus on that, okay? So you're making sure that from the beginning in your online practices that you're making sure students understand the big picture from the beginning, okay? The next thing in an online setting, we forget this one, a code of conduct. Let me talk about what I mean with a code of conduct. I was meeting with a group of teachers last week, and we were talking about how important it is to still have small groups, to do your guided reading groups, or your math, to have some small groups so that you're making sure that you're meeting the needs of all students. And many of the teachers said, you know, Davida, it's hard because we're afraid of what students will be doing if we do breakout sessions, what students will be doing if I'm not there. Again, if I'm not the one on the stage. And so I talked to them about what are your behavior expectations that you've put in place? Do students know what to do during a breakout session? Have you put those guidelines in place for students? Have you given clear and set behavioral expectations, clear and set classroom expectations, learning expectations? Have you set those? You know, when you're in front of students face to face, it's so much easier. You go over the class rules. Students know that from day one. But when we're learning online, there's so many different factors that come in. Have you set those clear expectations? Have you put in self-assessment so students are self-evaluating themselves when they're not working with you? And for some students, we may have some students that they need a little bit more. So when we talk about this code of conduct, they may need a behavior plan, something that you're monitoring with them, so that they know expectations either during your synchronous learning environments or your asynchronous learning environments, so they understand. So some students may need a behavior plan. So this is so important during the online setting. Digital literacy. Such an important thing to make sure that our students, especially our students with disabilities and our students as English as second language learners, that you have tools that they can access reading through an online platform, through your LMS, whatever you're using, that you have tools. And remember, I said access to the curriculum. So do you have level readers so that students can read independently, but at their level, still working on the same reading strategy or the same standard? Do you have digital literacy tools that allow for those students that have difficulty with decoding, that they're able to hear the text and listen to the text as they are reading? Do you have digital tools that allow students to highlight? So think about our students with learning disabilities and some of those executive functioning. They get lost in a lot of text. So do your digital literacy tools have areas where students can highlight, they can underline, they can circle, those strategies that naturally we use with your print resources in the classroom? Are you using strong digital literacy tools? You know, one of the things I love about National Geographic Learning and our K12, all of our reading resources have this robust, I call it dynamic, we call it these dynamic tools, so students still are able to access, remember it goes back to access the materials that you're giving them. So like our Reach Higher for elementary and our Insight and Edge for middle and high, those digital literacy tools are in there. Do you have tools that look at vocabulary? So we know our English as second language learners and our students that struggle with language, they need access to vocabulary even in an online environment. So ensuring that this is a part of your inclusive classroom. And then are you taking a moment to stop and look at the design and the content? You know, I almost say when we were working online, I was telling teachers last year when we first went online, it is almost that you do have to put on this show to make sure the way you design, the way you're presenting things to students, that they're able to access it. So are you designing your curriculum? Let's just think if you have a student that has a learning disability and they need things in bigger text. Have you taken that into consideration? Have you looked at your IEP goals to make sure the way you design the curriculum or the content that students will be seeing, is it affordable for them so that they can access the curriculum? So make sure that you're always taking that into consideration on the content design. Clear expectations, and this goes back to almost that code of conduct, but clear expectations for students, okay? Clear expectations for students. Do they know what's expected of them? Do they know, let's get back to this big picture, do they know how to meet the performance tasks? Have you given them rubrics, or can they self-assess? You can do this as early as those elementary, grade 1, grade 2, easy self-assessments and checks. So those clear expectations either early and then follow it back up in a written explanation as well to students. Providing feedback. I take all of these into consideration, but when I think about a diverse classroom, students with disabilities, students that are English as second language learners, even our high performing students, we have to be able, if we don't see students every day, that face-to-face where we could walk around the room, just touch base really quickly, how are you ensuring that you're providing feedback? This is so important because if we don't provide feedback, students don't know the big picture or how they're doing, if they're even getting close to the big picture, okay? Are you providing those quick checks for understanding? And I did this with our tips for Sunday morning. So if you join us on our website, you see those, and I gave some clear strategies on how you can still check for understanding and do some quick tip checks in an online setting. But this is so important that you're providing feedback, and not just feedback, you know, the thumbs up, thumbs down, but you're also giving very, very strategic next steps for students to inform their learning, okay? Those next steps. So you're letting students know what they did well. You're letting students know what they may need to work on, but often we forget the how. How do they get there? So in your feedback, giving them next steps and then checking in with them on that, okay? Checking in with them. And then the next one, varied content. And someone just asked me, out of curiosity, I love this, how do we space this? Do they have anything to do with importance? And if you see here on this side, I tried to really stick more to, this is your curriculum, this is your instruction, okay? The content, how you vary your content, how you provide feedback, the big picture, setting those clear expectations. So that was just one of the ways that when I designed this, it's just to kind of look at those different areas. But are you varying the content? This goes into how you scaffold or how you differentiate. And I'm going to talk about those differences between scaffolding and differentiating for students. Are you varying that on the design? And are you checking to make sure that how you're delivering content meets the diverse needs of your students? Now, I put over here, provide feedback, but I've also put request feedback. Remember, I asked those questions at the beginning. How are you forging relationships? How are you building a sense of community? How do we know if students in an online setting, especially our students that are having difficulty, how do we know if they're understanding? We're providing feedback, but have we requested feedback so that students can tell you, I'm not understanding, or I don't know how to access this. It's difficult for me to read the material because of this. If I'm a student with a learning disability, I may have difficulty because I can't read the material. The print is too small for me. So are you requesting feedback from students? And you can do this as early as elementary, and it's so important in middle and high school. You know, that's when students in middle and high school, I'm finding they're becoming a little bit more disengaged in this online setting. Are you getting their feedback? And then remembering language skills, all of those strategies we've talked about over the course of the last few weeks, but making sure that you're recognizing the different language skills of your students and you're providing supports for them. So it may be a scaffold as simple as a language frame, a sentence starter, or a question stem, that you're putting scaffolds and supports in place for students with language difficulties. And you're addressing varying learning styles. So I think it was 2 weeks ago, I talked about Gardner, and I always go back to multiple intelligence. Are you looking at varying learning styles? Do you know your students' learning styles? Are they visual learners? Okay, are they kinesthetic learners? You know, are those students that they would prefer to perform? Are you giving that? So let's look at this. I say varied content, that content design, all of this goes together with addressing those varying learning styles. If we're just always telling students to write, to respond, are we allowing for students to use remember I talked about inclusive, looking at those strengths, strength-based. Are we allowing students to kind of bode well on their strengths and use their strategies in the classroom setting? That helps to get you at an inclusive classroom setting. And I'll definitely send the website again. Okay. And this is so important. So I asked, were there any special education teachers or learning support assistants here, or SINCOs, or directors of inclusion? Have you worked with your inclusion department over the course of the last year? And how is that relationship? Are you looking at those IEP goals? Are you rewriting goals so that you can make sure that those accommodations meet the requirements of an online setting? Are your special education teachers, are they pushing into some of these classroom settings when you're online? So a great strategy is to have your special education teachers come in. If you're doing breakout sessions, a special education teacher could be working with one group, and the teacher could be working, the general education teacher could be working with another group. How powerful is that? And then I like to call it a true co-teaching model, and you swap groups so that students can hear it twice. All students benefit from that. And so those are strategies that all students benefit from, not just our students with disabilities, but all students could benefit from that. So using your team and your support services to make sure that you're addressing students' needs, number one, that you're using some varying teaching strategies, whether that's small group, whether that's some co-teaching. I love that someone says that we plan together, and the SINCO does some of those breakout sessions. Excellent. This helps to make sure that all students are learning. And even last year in the building I was working in, it may not be just your special education students that work with the Cinco or with your special education teachers. You may have other students that need additional support. So again, looking at inclusive practices for all may just include that different students learn differently and require different supports. And you're using these scaffolding tools, and I'm gonna really hone in on some scaffolding tools and what does that mean to scaffold. And I call this is kind of the array. In no particular order, I do have most of the curriculum and instruction here, and then kind of how the student addressing student needs, but these are all things that are really going to help to make sure your classroom is inclusive. And I love grouping within the class and swapping leaders. Excellent. I'm just now looking at some of the things in the chat. Peer teaching and small breakout. Wonderful strategy to use. I actually talk about that a little bit later, so thank you for that. Peer teaching in small breakout rooms, and the groups could be heterogeneous. Excellent. So often, sometimes we always think we have to group where it's just by ability, but we can also do some of those flexible grouping to allow for some leaders to come, some of those students that maybe some of your high performing students can help and work with some of your other students. So great when we're online. Remember, inclusive is making sure that all students are learning. So he's using some of these strategies that I see some of your peers and different people typing in the group. Maybe using the muddiest strategy way. Oh, I love this. The muddiest point strategy. I love that. Thank you, Nancy. That's a fun strategy to use as a way to question and provide feedback. And so Nancy, if you can just type a little bit more about the muddiest strategy in the chat, because I think that would be a great one that people can just hear a little bit more about. So using these strategies, making sure, do we have the right to alter the content? So when we say vary content, that's a great question, Sarah. When we say vary content, we're meaning not altering the content, so not taking it, the standard, here's the standard. It means varying by putting scaffoldings in place or differentiating the counts to make sure that students can access. So that's what I mean when I say varying the content, that we're ensuring that those scaffolding tools are in place, that differentiation is there, varying the way students may access the content, okay? Looking at their learning styles, how will they access the content? So that's what we mean when we say varying the content. Great questions. Okay. So online, and I know many of you have heard these two terms, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. We have these synchronous and these asynchronous environments or interactions with our students. And when we talk about inclusive, I'm going to talk about some advantages and disadvantages to both. We really should be using both of those, but we'll kind of talk about why some are better than others for some students. So we know that those synchronous environments are those interactions that are in real time. This would be an example of a synchronous learning environment, real time, providing learning with students and teachers interacting in real time. You know, you may be doing this through Microsoft Teams, through your Zooms, different ways, live chats, but real-time interaction between teachers and students. Versus those asynchronous times where those are at teacher discretion. Teacher may send resources or provide students with activities that they would do independently. You know, it looks at those time constraints and allowing teachers to give instruction over time, not just in a timetable or in that live format. So it kind of allows for those constraints that you would look at in a traditional classroom setting. So let's look at some advantages and disadvantages, especially when we look at the lens of inclusive practices. So when we talk about inclusive practices, things that you can do when you're looking at those synchronous interactions, of course, those small group instruction, okay? Those breakout rooms that you may have, and those whole group interactions. Also those co-teaching. So someone put in the chat that often the Cinco or someone from the special education team may come in and work closely with the teacher. I love this. If you're a KG or a grade 1 teacher, even having your teacher assistant to come in and provide some instruction while you're on too. So it allows for that in an inclusive practice. And it allows for real-time progress monitoring. So So the screen before, when we talked about what we should see in an inclusive setting, if you're in a synchronous learning environment, you can do that real-time progress monitoring to check for understanding. And you can do that scaffolding instruction real time. So within your lesson, when we talked about varying the content, that's where you would do this real time with students. So those advantages, classroom engagement. So if you have students with attention deficit who, if they're left on their own devices, they may not be able to perform as well. So within the classroom, you can engage those students. And you can use these dynamic learning tools that I was talking about. You know, through your LMS, you can use those dynamic tools real time so that you can model, you can explain, students can share their learning through the use of those dynamic learning. And again, that immediate feedback. So immediate feedback, real time, which is so important for students that are struggling, as well as those students that are working above grade level that you need to extend. You're giving them strategies on how to extend their learning. Some disadvantages in an inclusive classroom could be that rigidness to the schedule. So some students, I'm thinking of our students with autism, they may need some more flex time or opportunities to work one-on-one or by themselves, okay? They follow a timetable that's outside of the normal timetable. So they need something outside of that rigid schedule. And sometimes with our students that are struggling, that reliability of their own technology. So those are some advantages and some disadvantages of the synchronous learning. So now let's look at asynchronous learning. So for an inclusive practices, one of the things in this style is reinforcement of skills, okay? Reinforcement of skills. So in a classroom, you may start, you go back to synchronous, okay? Where you're kind of on the stage, you're modeling, you're sharing. And then for students that need reinforcement of the skills, extra practice, they have activities that they can do on their own to reinforce their learning. And then it allows for additional visual supports for students. So students that may not always understand from hearing it the first time, they're more visual learners, it allows for you to be able to visually, and we talked about that content design, that you may design some lessons for them to help with the visual learners. And then my favorite, the flipped classroom. So I worked in a school district in the United States, and we really, this is what we considered ourselves. We were a flipped classroom model school. And I love the flipped classroom because what it allows teachers to be able to do is kind of that preloading. Now, I saw someone said pre-teaching of ideas, preloading. It's where when they're not with you, when you're not in those live sessions, you can send material home like vocabulary, especially for middle and high school, their vocabulary. And it could be a video of yourself teaching them or working through the vocabulary. In a math class, you may send those preloadings of how to solve problems so that they can be prepared for the live session. So those flipped classroom models where you're doing a video and you're teaching them, they could be watching a video. You could give them things to glean on. And some of your LMS, we have some great practice tools through our supports where they have a lot of practice in the remediation where you can do students watch tutorial videos. We have some of those in our Big Ideas Math. So a great way to use those tutorial videos in your flipped classroom so that you preloaded them with information so that you can make good use time of your synchronous interactions. A lot of times what I hear from teachers is it's not enough time. How do I do all of this? How do I make sure that I'm doing this? Not enough time. So I would encourage you to kind of use these flipped classroom models where you're preloading students before you're pre-teaching. So within the live session, you really can work towards those practical applications and students applying what they've learned. You can do this through project-based learning as well. And these projects, making sure when we say project-based learning, that the projects reflect varying learning styles and student accommodations. So if you assign a project and you tell everyone, write a 5-page essay, well, that's not a project that makes sure that you're looking at varying learning styles. You may have some students to record themselves, okay? You may have some students that want to do a skit. So making sure that you're looking at varying learning styles. And again, some advantages, here's the pacing and the flexibility for students. Equitable contribution. So sometimes when we're online and live, everyone's not participating. But through this, you can send students specific examples. You can have some communication back and forth using your classroom tools, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom of sorts. And more time for students to reflect. So students who struggle, who have executive functioning issues, they need more time to reflect on their own learning. And so this is an advantage here. The disadvantages, though, especially when we talk about inclusive settings, it is open to misinterpretations. Students may not understand what you want them to do when they're left on their own. And then for those students that are easily disengaged, okay, or students with attention difficulties, you know, they disengage, they're not easily motivated. This may not always work for students. So I implore you that your strategies in an online class, when you're thinking about how do I make my classroom inclusive, that you're doing a combination of those asynchronous and the synchronous learning interactions. Now, this is probably my favorite to look at, is this universal design for learning. And so UDL is an opportunity for all students. So, you know, I've talked about special education or English as second language learners, but what I love about UDL is really to make sure all students, regardless if these are students that are gifted students or are students also that are performing below grade levels, that all students have that access, they can participate in their learning, and they are able to progress in grade level curriculum. So this is UDL. And UDL was based off the premises of looking at the brain functions in 3 different categories when we look at how we learn, okay? 3 primary brain networks. And those are the recognition network. What do we recognize? What do we understand? The strategic network and the effective network. So then UDL breaks it down even into 3 principles based on those brain networks and how our brain functions in order to learn. And so they've broken it down into how do we represent, okay, the what of learning, okay? How do we represent that? So we went back to that original chart that I talked about, content design, varying the content. How do we represent the content, okay? Then the next principle is action and expression. So this means the how of learning. So how do students learn and how do they demonstrate to you that they've learned? So that action and expression. And then the last principle of UDL is engagement in learning, okay? The why of learning. How do students engage or participate in their learning? And so I've just given a few ideas. I'm going to take a moment just so that you can look on this screen and just look at, if we're talking about representing our content or the what of learning, how do we do this? Are we providing videos to present learning to students, or animation to get them engaged from the beginning? Simulations. Do we use concept maps and graphic organizers, those anchor charts to present information so that all students, that they can see it visually? Do we model and share? Even high school teachers, do we model and share what is expected of students? So that's the representing of content, the what of their learning. And then we look at the action and expression within the classroom setting. Are we allowing, I saw some people type this in the chat, are we allowing for discussion time? Okay, and here it's hard. I hate these webinars that are like this because I can't hear anyone. But normally if I was doing this, I would want that active discussion where we could have those open dialogues back and forth. So does your classroom look like that? Or if I was to go into your online classroom, is it quiet with maybe just the teacher talking, or maybe just 1 or 2 students talking? So how do you include that? Do you role play? Do you have students look at case studies, simulations, service learning? Remember those global thinkers. Can they create? Can they design things? So making sure that students can express based on their learning styles. And then let's look at engagement and learning. So we always say, are we active learning? I put my hand up for a reason, sorry about that. Do we have active learning within our classroom? Okay, and how does that look? So is our classroom, is it authentic? Is it challenging for students? Because if it's not challenged, then you don't have that authentic and engaging classroom. Do you start with a hook at the beginning of your lesson? How do you hook students? Maybe giving them a surprising fact, okay, or describing an event, some important event that's happened, or a quote. I started that at the beginning of this presentation. I started with a quote that I love that really looks at inclusive, just to get you to start thinking, to engage you. So do you do some of these things with your students in your classroom? Do you inject humor? Okay. Read alouds. Do you have those in your classroom where you're not just reading, where students are reading as well? And are you modeling and support? Encouraging to present their answers. I'm going into the chat now. Oh, I love this one because I put up here using graphic organizers and constant maps, and someone just said, teaching them how to use those graphic organizers. In an inclusive classroom, often we'll say, this is a cool graphic organizer, a web diagram, and you give it to students. Have you taught them how to use it? Have you taught them so that independently they would be able to take what you've taught them and use it on their own? As they're writing persuasive writing, do they know, I remember that we learned how to use this cool graphic board. Let me make one myself. So have you done that? Someone else said activating prior knowledge through those picture walks or those videos to tackle the big idea, all about representing content. So this is why this is called a universal design for learning, because these are not just strategies that you use for students that are performing below grade level. These are strategies that you should use for all students to make sure that all students are learning, that they're participating. That's the premise of UDL. They're participating. They're actively engaged. And the first one that I keep going back to, they can access the curriculum. Again, making sure we can access. Many times students that struggle are students with disabilities. And I was even, when I was a beginning teacher, I was responsible for this. I always thought, I'm first year teaching special education, that I need to just keep reinforcing the practicing tool until they got it. And what I found with my students, that they weren't making progress. They finally learned that concept, sure, but there was so much of the curriculum that I had missed because I didn't make sure that I was giving them access and making sure that I differentiated. I removed barriers, that I really got to students' learning styles, that I varied the way I delivered my instruction. Okay, some of this isn't just differentiation, it's varying the way that you deliver. And then varying the way that I expect to know whether or not students learn what they were expected from the learning objectives. So just think about that. And posing the essential question to discuss and role play. I love this one. I love that one. So turning the essential question into a role playing activity. I love that idea. Making sure that students understand why the essential question is on the board. I had this discussion with teachers, we're always putting the essential question or learning objective, whichever one you go by, but do students really know what it means? So having students to rewrite it in their own words is an activity that you can do. Again, all ways that students are accessing, they're participating, and they're engaged in their learning. Okay, I'm looking at time. So there's a difference between scaffold instruction and differentiation, okay? And often some people think that's the same, but there is a difference. So scaffold would be something that you can use for everyone, okay? How you scaffold instruction, how you chunk your instruction, chunk it into small parts, break it down. This is a strategy for all students. You scaffold for your high performers so that they can extend their learning, as well as you're scaffolding for students that are performing below grade level. But it's so important because when you scaffold instruction, teachers are adding those supports to students, and it enhances the learning and aids. It is an aid in the mastery of tasks. So I mentioned early those language frames, and I love language frames or sentence starters. You can use those with critical thinking, Bloom's taxonomy, and it's just giving them kind of those supports, okay? I call them templates too, that students, you put those scaffolds in place for students so that they can start to be able to, you can move them away. So I call it a bridge. Students may need scaffolds at first and you move them away so that they become independent. Okay, so you're building on students' experiences and their knowledge as they're learning new skills through these scaffolds. And, I love some of our resources, like when I look at Reach Higher or even our science material, scaffolds are put in place in every single lesson. and then it builds through so that students learn how to do it independently and can move through that gradual release of responsibility. Okay, so here's just some examples, quick examples of scaffolding. And I won't read all of them, but some of those free responses, those sentence starters. Problem solving. So scaffolding by providing some students an extra video example of how to solve the problem, or chunking the problem into smaller parts to make it more manageable for students. Okay. Modeling, offering exemplars to students. That's the scaffold. So those are just some different examples, some quick examples of scaffolds. Okay. And then someone said, I think the use of these strategies are also level dependent and should also be chosen judiciously. Very true. So every strategy is not going to be good for every student. That's why we said know your students so that you can address their needs. Yeah. Know your students so that you can address their needs. Thank you for that. Okay. So let's look at the difference between a scaffold and differentiation really quickly. So a lot of times teachers will say, I definitely differentiate. I give this student's group of work and I give another group this group of work, and this group over here, they're doing this group of work. Not always quite differentiating. Let's look at this true definition. I love this. Is an instructional shift requiring teachers to provide students. Here's the part I want you to focus on, with differentiating entry or exit points to the task. Different entry or exit points, okay? Now, all students may not need differentiation, but for students that do, this means that you've looked at maybe they may enter the lesson differently, okay? The strategies you use at the beginning so that they can access the material look different. You may, if you're working on three-step multiplication, three-digit multiplication with the student, that their entry point may be that you're providing those students with a multiplication chart. You're also, for those students, reviewing with them those simple step multiplication so that they can get to the standard, okay? And then those exit points. So again, how they exit the lesson may look different. So those varying entry and exit points, and then differentiation, it's not just these different assignments, but it's also looking at different of the content, how we differentiate by content, by the process, and by the end product. Okay, so content, process, and product is what we think about when we think about differentiation, versus scaffolding is just how you chunk, how you provide some of those scaffolds or those chunks for students. Okay, this is actually looking at how you differentiate in the content, the process, and the product by looking at those entry and exit points. And some examples of that may be tiered scaffolding. So I have used the word scaffolding back here because you may have tiered scaffolding assignments for students so that you're starting at this level and by at the end you want students to reach here. Okay, great for students with IEPs. Know their IEP goals and then you tier their assignments for them. Then those flexible grouping and or ability grouping so that you're using grouping. That's another way to differentiate. And I put choice boards here because with differentiation, it's important to add in student choice as well. So you're setting the stage, you know what you need students to learn, but you're giving them some choice with this through your differentiating. And you're creating learning stations, okay? You can do this online. Someone said they're breakout sessions. Great way online to do those learning stations. So while you're working with a small group of students, whether it's that flexible grouping or those ability groupings, you're creating some hands-on learning stations where students are doing different activities, but in order to reach that learning objective or that standard. So someone said this earlier, and I know I'm running out of time a little bit. You guys have been wonderful with your questions, and I'm going to kind of get through these last two. You're welcome to stay on because we're right at 6:03. But someone said this earlier, these words, equality and equity. I love that. So I want you just to take a look at this picture when we think of an inclusive setting. And this is something that I've shown teachers for years in trainings that I've done in the States and working with special education departments and inclusion departments. And let's look at the differences that you see here, okay? And this gets at that question of equality versus equity. We are looking for equity in students' access. In the first picture, sorry, In the first picture, every student is not able to access. They're not able to access or see the game. They're not able to access, okay? They're there, which is great. They're there, but they're not able to access. The equity is giving students either scaffolds, the differentiation, accommodations, so that students are able to access the event, or the event being your instruction or the learning environment. And you can just see here that by putting those scaffolds or by putting different differentiation or accommodations in place, now every student is able to access. That's equity in learning. That's an inclusive classroom that you understand that have to make sure that every student is able to access the curriculum. So for those of you who are staying on, just these are my last two slides, and then I'll get to some of the questions too. I just wanted to put some examples of some different accommodations that you could use in the online environment for students with learning disabilities or dyslexia. And I also say, even though these are strategies that really work for students with learning disabilities or dyslexia, these are also best practices and great strategies to use with varying different learners, our English as second language learners as well. So I'll just give you a moment to look at these, pre-teaching those new concepts, so doing that through a flipped classroom model, great in the online setting, making sure that you have those online reading tools, okay? Using those speech to text software is important for our students with learning disabilities. Allowing additional time. Students with learning disabilities have executive functioning issues, the way their brain receives information. So you need to allow for additional time. Not forgetting, many students with learning disabilities require information to be presented to them in large print text. So when you're showing your PowerPoints in the online setting or you're presenting information, have you taken into consideration this? Using some virtual manipulatives and flashcards with students, partnering with peers for reading activities, highlighting, underlining keywords or points in the online setting. So these are just a few, there's so many more, allowing students to respond differently, orally, video, posters, creating PowerPoints, using some of those online tools that I talked about during our first session. I've also put just some key strategies to think about for your students with ADHD or your students with attention deficits, okay? And this could go with just students that may not be diagnosed, but just students that have attention issue difficulties, or students that aren't as motivated. Here are some things that you can use with them. Using those visual timetables and schedules so that they are able to schedule themselves, that they know what's expected, what's coming next, what was become before, okay? Again, highlighting, annotating for them. The use of timers for these choice boards, okay? Allowing movement throughout your lessons. And those balance of those synchronous and asynchronous learning environments. Making sure for our students that have attention deficits that you're in the synchronous environment, that you're calling on them regularly to make sure that they are engaged, using hand signals or your chat box during those times, okay? Oh, it's to be very great. I'm glad you're wanting to see this, okay? So glad you stayed on. So making sure that you're using some of these strategies, those movement breaks, okay, within the lesson. Whether it's through song, dance, or games, even for older students, allowing those students that you know, have to just putting in your schedule those quick movement breaks for students. And positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement really could go for any student, but especially our students with attention deficit, they need and require positive reinforcement. So if you thought of a way to provide frequent positive reinforcement and discuss this with students. You know, we do a great job, especially elementary teachers, when we're in the building of having those behavior plans or those sticker charts and all of those different things, your class dojos. Are you continuing this positive reinforcement even in an online setting? And for middle and high school, have you figured out a way? Are you using some quick behavior charts with students? Some quick positive reinforcement through the chats? Are you making sure that you do that? And then our students who are on the spectrum, our students with autism spectrum disorder. And this is one of my backgrounds. I've worked extensively with students on the spectrum. And so having explicit routines for those students, even your high functioning autism students, to make sure that they understand what's happening, whether it's via synchronous or asynchronous learning environment. Assigning those sensory breaks. So we, again, I think we do a great job, and our Syncos help us with this in the building, but are we ensuring, remember I said, are we checking in well-being? And this isn't, those sensory breaks may not even be just for students with autism disorder. Your students that you know have attention deficits, hyperactivity. Have you assigned some time? Have you worked through that with students and checking their well-being? You may say, oh, they're awfully distracted during this lesson. Well, where did they just come from? What were they doing before? Did they have a break that allowed for movement or some sensory activity before? Are you using visual and audio instructions? Okay, you're not just talking, but are you allowing some visual and audio where they can hear it back? Have you recorded yourself for students on the spectrum? And again, these are great strategies, not just for our students with autism disorder, but also for all students. Okay, explicit with your direction, those alternative ways to present information, allowing typing instead of writing. I think I may have wanted to include that for all of them. And providing choice is so important for our students on the spectrum, allowing for their strengths to come out, especially when they don't have that face-to-face interaction. Okay, that takes me to the end. Thank you for those of you who've stayed on 10 minutes after. Thank you so much. I am going to stay on for Q&A. There are so many, I just love this as a part of this professional learning community, your ideas and what you're sharing. We will be putting up more practical applications. I saw some people, I want to see more practical application. Those will come with my tips for Sunday morning. So on the website, and I'll show you the website in one moment. Every Sunday, I'll try to put new tips for Sunday morning. You are welcome to email me if you say, Davida, I'm using this great strategy or this great tool that I found that's really working with students, and I just want to share. Please send it to me. I will share it on our website so that the larger community can see it. But I do want to hear from you. I want to hear how your learning has been. If you've been working with me throughout the journey of embracing change, I want to hear how you felt. What can we do differently? What would you like more of? Also, if you want to hear more about National Geographic Learning, there's ways within the survey that you can find out more about us and what we do and our resources and our platform. But please participate in the survey. I'll also add it in the chat, but there is a QR code that you can use, as well as this, as well as the link for SurveyMonkey. So there's two ways you can access it, via SurveyMonkey, the link, or using the QR code. And I am going to go out of the PowerPoint just for 1 second so that I can put the QR code in the chat. So just give me 1 second to do that, just so that you can have the link for survey. Please, we want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. We will start a new series in May, so we will not be meeting the month of April, but in May we will start a new series. So I would love to hear from everyone. Are there particular topics that you would like to hear about, or different things, so that we can make sure that we are meeting everyone's their needs. So here is the link for SurveyMonkey, or you could use the QR code. So I'm just going to pull this back up again and share my screen. Wonderful. Okay. Also, here people asked about the website. So here's the website, ngl-emea.com/K12. So please check out our website. You'll find those teaching tips that I was talking about, which is practical application. There's already one for progress monitoring and checking for understanding in a lesson, which is some quick strategies. And there's also one for using language frames for English second language learners. And I'll be putting a new one on the website next week. All of the recordings for all of the sessions. So if this is your first session that you've joined, you may go on our website and watch the other ones, the other sessions. And then some of you, if you are able to participate tomorrow in project exploration, there's information about how your students can access that. So thank you so much for joining. I have truly, truly enjoyed just being with you guys and hearing your ideas and just talking about just trends in education and important strategies to really give you some toolbox, and also as we kind of do this shift in online learning. So thank you so much. Can we also have 3 and 4? Okay, yeah, so there's 2 teaching tips, and I'll add one more next week. Thank you, Nadia, for putting in the website for me. Thank you. Takes a village. And so Nadia just put in the website link, and then I gave you the link to our survey. Please, I want your feedback. We want to hear from you. And then there's just also within the survey, if you want to learn more about NGL and the K12 team, we can allow for that as well. And link to the survey, please. Yeah, I'll put that back again. I'm just going to stop sharing so that I can, there we go. Okay. Here is the link for the survey. And the QR code. I can also share the QR code, Belinda. Thank you for that. Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay. So please share the QR code with anyone that may have left earlier. And thank you, everyone. And I will stay on. There's some questions in the Q&A. So I will just take a moment to go to the Q&A. If I see any questions that may go for the whole group, some people are asking about the webinar certificate. So if you have not received, if you would like a personalized certificate, Belinda, I think you're still on. Belinda, can you please put your email in the chat? And you can email Belinda directly for a personalized certificate. So if you didn't receive one for any of the past webinars, or even for this one today, just let us know. Oh, I can show the equality side. I can show it again. No worries. Let me pull that one back up. Okay, someone asked me to show a slide again. This is actually my favorite. I have used this slide probably for the last 10 years. Okay, so here it is. I love this slide, and it just really shows if you're really making sure you're in an inclusive classroom, an inclusive school. I would encourage teachers or administrators, when they start at the beginning of the year, to show this slide. It just really shows about making sure that all students have access to curriculum, to materials. We always make sure that they're there, right? But have we made sure that there's equity? And then if I remove these, it shows the actual words, equality versus equity. And what we're looking for when we say inclusive practices is equity, that all students can access. So I think someone wanted to see that slide again. Could we have some materials? So we'll make sure that we get all of the materials and the recordings on the website by the end of this week. Okay. Just trying to go through the questions. A few people have just asked this question. About materials and just getting some of the materials. I can definitely make sure that everyone receives the materials for these sessions. We can make sure definitely that we put these on the website. Okay. Thank you, Myla. And thank you, Gianna. It's wonderful to see you again. Okay. Look forward to seeing you again in May as well. Thank you, Belinda. Okay. Yes, we will definitely share the recording. If you can just check back on our website within the next 2 days, check back by Thursday, and all of the recordings should be on there. I'm just making note, because a lot of people have asked about the recording. So I will make sure that we have the recordings for all sessions, for all 4 sessions on our website. Thank you, everyone. Everyone's saying looking forward to May. So am I. So excited to really, really start this professional learning community. And please fill out the survey, share out your ideas, any topics that you'd like to make sure that we focus on for the month of May and going forward. Nora, if you're still on, I'm just writing down your name, and you will get a personalized. So I'll make sure you get the personalized certificate. And you can also, I think Belinda put her email address here. Let me try to go back up, and she will make sure that she sends you one, but I just wrote down your name as well, okay? Okay, you attended session 2 and 4. Okay, perfect. Okay. And all right. Wonderful, thank you. I'm gonna go and see if I can find Belinda's email here so that she can definitely get everyone their certificates. Okay. Thank you, Belinda, you're still on. Belinda just put her email again. So those of you who are requesting those personalized certificates, if you can look down, Belinda just put her email again in the chat, and you can send her an email. I'm making a list as well, but just to make sure we don't miss anyone, she's put her email again in the chat for everyone, and just send her a quick email. Belinda, can you type your email one more time, please? Thank you. Oh, let's see. Thank you. Belinda, they're saying they're not seeing it. Check to make sure that you put to attendees and not just to me. That may be what the problem. Okay, there it is, guys. Okay, great. You see it now. Okay, so just email Belinda. She'll make sure that you receive your personalized, and I've wrote down some names as well. Okay. All right. And Jihan, if you'll just put down your email for me so that we can make sure you get all 4. And Jihan, to make sure you've attended all 4. Oh, and you know what? I was so busy in my presentation, I forgot to do some of the other prize winners. I'll just pull some names out of a hat so that I can give some prizes away. Yay. Thank you, Gian. Okay. Okay, I'll state one. It looks like some of the questions are starting to go down. I'm going to check the Q&A. And the slides I think I've answered. Perfect. Okay. I think I have the majority of the questions answered. Thank you for putting your emails. Please email Belinda regarding certificates. I will make sure that the recordings are put on for all 4 sessions, hopefully by the end of this week. And I look forward to seeing all of you again in May. Please visit our website. And my screen is stuck. I haven't tried to move my screen really. Okay. I will be putting those tips for Sunday morning. We'll give you some practical application to use in your classrooms. And so just thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will be signing off in a minute or two. And I will see everyone virtually in May. And hopefully in the near future, I will be able to visit you in some of your schools. So I'm just, hoping that some of your schools, and we're working with you guys, and we can come to your schools when we're able to travel and to visit, and that we can share some of this information face to face. So thank you guys. Saudi Arabia, yes. Jihan, which school are you at? Are you at in Saudi Arabia? Okay, I'm gonna put this, I'm doing a lot of training in the upcoming weeks for some different schools in Saudi Arabia. So I was just looking to see if it was one of the schools. So yes, I will definitely, as soon as we're able to travel, we'll definitely be within the region. So I'm excited. Hopefully our paths will cross. Okay, okay, wonderful. International school, okay. I'm sure next year we will definitely see each other in person. That is my prayer. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Goals. Definitely. Okay, guys, it has been wonderful. I hate to say goodbye. It's about 6:30. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And again, I will see everyone hopefully in May, and then next year, hopefully face to face. And thank you for joining. Join the website. If you have any great tips that you would like to share to the broader community, please send them to me. And I think I have my email there, but just it's also in the Zoom application, but I will put it here before I sign off. And there's my email. Okay, guys. All right, everyone stay safe and take care. Thank you, Alma. I love that. Oh, Alma, you just made my day with that one. Bye, everyone.